Professional actors, you go in and just jump in and do it, best of your ability.
Can I say one thing? Please. To me, the great Stanley Kubrick was an actor's enemy. And I can point to movies that he's done, the worst performances.
In a recent conversation with Variety magazine, Robert Duvall, widely regarded as an emblem of authentic acting in The Godfather and Apocalypse, now shook Hollywood to its core when he openly called out the individuals he said he would never be able to forgive. Now, in his 90s, Duvall no longer maintains the silence he kept for decades. He calmly recounted the years marked by betrayal, the professional wounds he had never once spoken about. There were people who tried every possible way to seize his assets. There were stars who openly attacked him on live television, causing his reputation to falter. And worst of all, the person he once referred to as his first teacher was the very one who initiated the call to isolate him from Hollywood. So in the end, which names did Robert Duvall bring into the light, and among them, who was the one who left him with the deepest and most lasting scar? One, Marlon Brando, when devotion turns into a bitter obsession. In the summer of 1971, the scorching heat of New York blanketed every street. Inside the Paramount soundstage, the crew of The Godfather was in the most intense period of filming. Francis Ford Coppola, then barely in his 30s, thin and constantly sleep-deprived from relentless studio pressure, struggled to keep the production together. Amid the heavy atmosphere of dozens of anxious crew members, only one man moved with a slow, deliberate pace, as if the entire world were expected to wait for him, Marlon Brando. By that time, he was already a legend hailed by Time magazine as the soul of American cinema, while Robert Duvall remained merely a supporting face, a stage actor still very new to Hollywood. From the very first day Brando appeared on set, the atmosphere shifted completely. He arrived nearly 2 hours late, cigarette in hand, dark sunglasses on, accompanied by 3 personal assistants. No one dared to remind him of anything. A lighting technician later told the New York Post. When he walked in, the whole crew went silent, as if the president had just shown up. At that moment, Duvall still worshipped Brando. He had watched On the Waterfront and A Streetcar Named Desire so many times he could recite them, believing Brando embodied the purest form of freedom in acting. But only a few weeks later, that admiration gradually transformed into irritation. Brando refused to learn his lines and never attended any group script readings. He demanded that cue cards be placed all over the set, even on James Caan's back, so he could glance at them during scenes. A crew member revealed to The New Yorker that he had to stand behind the camera for 6 straight hours just to hold a line board for Brando. We called it an acting class on extremely poor memory, he recalled. What disappointed Duvall most was the way Brando used his own instability to dominate the entire set. In emotionally heavy scenes, Brando deliberately changed lines, throwing off his co-actor's rhythm and forcing multiple retakes. He never warned anyone about what he planned to do, sometimes delivering lines completely different from the script. Coppola, who idolized Brando, continued to indulge him. To Duvall, what he witnessed no longer resembled creative genius, but rather chaos, disguised as brilliance. By March 1972, The Godfather premiered and instantly became a cultural phenomenon. Brando was praised as the perfect godfather, while Duvall received modest compliments for being solid and dependable. Not long after, Variety revealed that Brando had been awarded an additional $50,000 from Paramount due to his media impact, while none of the other actors received anything. The leak, originating from the studio's accounting department, caused widespread unrest among the cast. A journalist from the Los Angeles Times wrote Duvall left the press conference early, his face cold as stone. A year later, Marlon Brando shocked the entire world. On the night of March 27, 1973, at the Academy Awards in Los Angeles, when his name was announced as Best Actor, Brando did not appear. Instead, he sent a Native American woman named Sacheen Littlefeather to the stage to refuse the Oscar-protesting Hollywood's distortion of indigenous representation. The moment was broadcast live across the United States. Half the country praised him for speaking the truth. The other half called him reckless and arrogant. Duvall, watching the ceremony from his home in Los Angeles, saw it all. The next morning, headlines everywhere declared Brando turns the Oscars into a political stage. For Duvall, that was the final straw. He viewed it as a betrayal of the people who had poured their souls into making the film. From that point on, Brando grew increasingly bizarre. During a 1975 recording of The Tonight Show, he brought a real parrot on set, leaving host Johnny Carson stunned and speechless. In 1978, he expelled a journalist from the Los Angeles Herald from his mansion simply for asking about his weight. Hollywood gradually began to view Brando as a mad genius, while Duvall described it all as a symphony of self-destruction. By 1990, real-life tragedy struck. Brando's son, Christian Brando, shot and killed his sister Cheyenne's boyfriend at the family's Beverly Hills home. Special broadcasts from NBC, CNN, and ABC News ran non-stop for a week, leaving America stunned. Throughout the nearly two-year trial, Brando sat silently in the courtroom gallery, his hair gray and his face weighed down with exhaustion. He wept when he heard the sentence, 10 years in prison for his son. Broadcasters called it the real-life Corleone tragedy. Christian went to prison. Cheyenne fell into severe depression and later took her own life in Tahiti. Brando lived the rest of his days in isolation, weighing nearly 140 kilograms, avoiding the press entirely. A writer for Esquire once remarked Brando created a magnificent Don Vito Corleone and then spent the rest of his life becoming that very shadow. When asked about Brando in 1991, Robert Duvall replied with a single brief statement during a press conference in Beverly Hills Genius. Sometimes it's just chaos shot in close-up. After that, he never spoke Brando's name again. In 2004, Brando passed away in Los Angeles at the age of 80. The funeral, held privately at Hillside Memorial Park, gathered hundreds of stars, but Duvall was nowhere to be seen. A former member of the Godfather crew revealed that Duvall had sent Francis Ford Coppola a plain white card with only 3 words written on it: "Let it end." Among the dozens of conflicts Duvall had faced throughout his career, only Marlon Brando managed to evoke in him both deep respect and profound disdain, a fallen monument collapsing right before his eyes, leaving Duvall with the haunting fear that talent without discipline inevitably ends in ruin. Yet a few years later, Robert Duvall found himself stepping into another complicated relationship, not with an aging legend this time, but with the man who once called him brother on the set of The Godfather, Al Pacino. 2. Stanley Kubrick, the emotionless genius who sent chills down Duvall's spine. In the winter of 1980, all of England was wrapped in a thick, icy fog. At the Odeon Leicester Square Theatre, The Shining had just premiered and immediately ignited a media storm. The Guardian hailed Stanley Kubrick as the man who turns nightmares into an art form, while Time magazine described him as the director who can manipulate the audience's fear with nothing more than a glance. Critics were enthralled, and theaters were packed to the brim. Yet more than 6,000 kilometers away, inside a small wooden house in Virginia, Robert Duvall was quietly watching the film's behind-the-scenes feature on BBC, and the longer he watched, the colder his spine felt. That program was The Making of the Shining broadcast during BBC Panorama's prime-time slot in December 1980. In the footage, Shelley Duvall, the actress who played Wendy Torrance, appeared exhausted, her hair disheveled, dark circles under her eyes, and her hand trembling as she gripped a baseball bat. Kubrick forced her to film the same single scene 127 times, simply because he felt the fear on her face wasn't real enough. Every time Shelley asked for a break, Kubrick responded in an ice-cold tone with just one word: again. A lighting technician revealed in a 2005 interview with The Independent that Shelley's hair fell out in clumps every day she was isolated from the rest of the crew, and she required months of psychological treatment at the private Maida Vale Hospital in London after production wrapped. When the behind-the-scenes footage aired, audiences were both stunned and outraged. BBC even called it a masterpiece paid for with tears. Robert Duvall watched the entire program silently in his living room. A close friend told Vanity Fair that once the TV was switched off, he remained seated for hours, smoking one cigarette after another without getting up. To Duvall, who believed that acting should be rooted in empathy, what he saw felt like a torture session captured in close-up on an Arriflex 35mm camera. Few people knew that just a few months later, Duvall received an unexpected invitation. In February 1981, Stanley Kubrick contacted him through a representative in Los Angeles and asked him to fly to London to discuss The Aryan Papers, a script never publicly released set during World War II, in which Kubrick wanted Duvall to portray a conflicted German officer. Duvall agreed to travel to England partly out of curiosity and partly because he wanted to understand the man he had silently condemned. The meeting took place in Kubrick's small office at Borehamwood Studios on the outskirts of London. According to notes written by a production assistant, there were only 3 people in the room: Kubrick, Duvall, and his personal assistant, Leon Vitali. There were no laughs, not even a cup of coffee offered. Kubrick spoke continuously for nearly half an hour about lighting composition, the rhythm of an actor's breathing, and how to control the audience through the tempo of their nervous system. Duvall never interrupted, simply observing him with quiet caution. A security guard later told The Telegraph that as Duvall walked out, he turned to his driver and said coldly, "The air in there is colder than a morgue." The Aryan Papers project was eventually canceled. Kubrick gave no explanation, and Duvall returned to the United States, refusing all future offers of collaboration. In a private letter he wrote to his close friend director Horton Foote, preserved at the UCLA Film Archive, he wrote, "I cannot work with someone who treats emotion as a tool. That kind of art makes audiences cry, but it leaves the actor empty and stripped bare." 3 decades passed, and the story seemed buried for good. But in 2010, during the Hollywood Reporter Roundtable, featuring major names like Ryan Gosling, Colin Firth, Jeff Bridges, Robert Duvall, suddenly brought it up again. When asked who the most difficult director to work with was, he answered without hesitation, "Stanley Kubrick is the enemy of actors." His response froze the entire room. The next day, Variety ran the headline, "Robert Duvall publicly criticizes the legendary Kubrick." The film world immediately split into 2 sides. One group claimed Duvall was old-fashioned and unable to grasp extreme art. The other defended him, especially as behind-the-scenes footage from The Shining began circulating widely again on YouTube, revealing to younger audiences exactly what Shelley Duvall had endured. From that moment on, the phrase "emotionless genius," which Duvall used to describe Kubrick, became a symbol of the eternal debate between art and humanity in Hollywood. In 2012, The Atlantic published an article titled, "Robert Duvall Was Right," about Kubrick, asserting Kubrick may have crafted monumental fear, but he never learned how to make his actors feel safe. Robert Duvall never retracted his statement. In a 2015 interview with Esquire, he simply said quietly, Kubrick was a genius, but a genius without a heart. His voice was deep, firm, and final. The irony, however, is that the man Duvall once regarded as a mentor, Francis Ford Coppola, gradually evolved into a frightening mirror image of Kubrick, ambitious, grand, yet emotionally distant. For Duvall, it marked the second heartbreaking disillusionment of his career. From admiring Brando to drifting apart from Pacino to recoiling at Kubrick's methods, Duvall believed he had become immune to disappointment. But he was wrong, because the biggest blow came from the very man who helped launch him into legend. 3. Al Pacino, when a trusted colleague turns into an invisible rival. In the mid-1970s, Hollywood had two very different types of men who managed to captivate the entire world. One was quiet, discreet, and preferred to observe everything in silence like a monk. That was Robert Duvall. The other was explosive, intense, and could make every eye in the room instantly shift toward him the moment he walked in. Al Pacino. The two had once been close friends, almost inseparable during the early 1970s, right when The Godfather was being filmed. According to an old article from the Los Angeles Herald-Examiner, Pacino and Duvall once shared a small apartment in the Beverly Glen area. They ate canned noodles, split the rent, and stayed up late studying their lines together. Duvall helped Pacino adjust every breath, while Pacino taught Duvall how to hold the fire of anger in your eyes when the camera sweeps in. They treated each other like true brothers. Behind the scenes of The Godfather Part 1, people often saw them laughing inside the trailer, sharing lukewarm coffee and talking about making movies with the heart, not for fame. But everything shifted after the second film was released in 1974. The Godfather II turned Al Pacino into an international superstar. He appeared everywhere on the covers of Time, Rolling Stone, and People. Meanwhile, Duvall, though praised as the most reliable man on screen, chose to retreat from the noise. He went back to his farm in Virginia, raised horses, read plays, and only accepted roles he genuinely cared about. Those two opposite paths created an invisible distance neither of them wanted to acknowledge. By 1989, Paramount officially announced the production of The Godfather Part 3. Hollywood erupted. Variety called it the reunion of the century. Coppola wanted the original cast back, and both Pacino and Duvall were invited to return. The initial negotiations went smoothly until the contract numbers appeared. According to The Hollywood Reporter, Paramount offered Al Pacino $5 million plus 5% of the box office profits, while Robert Duvall was offered only $1 million less than 1/5 of what Pacino would receive. The news leaked quickly and appeared on the front page of Variety on September 4, 1989. Paramount bets on Pacino leaves Duvall behind. Inside the studio, tension grew heavier. A communications employee recalled that Duvall read the contract 3 times, said nothing throughout the entire meeting, and then stood up and walked out. A few days later, he sent a fax to Coppola with a brief message, "I don't want to return just to be someone's backdrop." When Duvall's withdrawal was confirmed, the New York Post described it as a heartbreaking crack in a legendary wall. The character Tom Hagen, the moral backbone of the first 2 films, was removed entirely from the script and reduced to a single line of dialogue. Some reports even claimed that Coppola tried to persuade Pacino to lower his salary so they could keep Duvall, but he refused. An investigative piece from Entertainment Weekly later quoted an anonymous Paramount employee saying Pacino simply said, "That's the studio's business, not mine." The remark sparked fierce debate. People began to compare the two men, one who chose fame and one who chose principle. On December 20th, 1990, The Godfather Part 3 premiered at Mann's Chinese Theater in Los Angeles. Every major cast member attended except Robert Duvall. According to the Los Angeles Times, he flew back to Virginia that very morning to stay away from the press. A close friend said he couldn't bear hearing the theme music without seeing Tom Hagen's face. The film was a commercial success, but critics deemed it a chapter without a soul. The Chicago Tribune wrote, "When Duvall left, The Godfather lost the voice of reason." Afterward, Duvall nearly vanished from Hollywood's frenzy, returning only for smaller, quieter works like Tender Mercies or The Apostle. Pacino, on the other hand, kept rising, living under flashing cameras and constant headlines about his personal relationships. By the mid-2000s, tabloids like People and Page Six mentioned Pacino almost monthly, from his romance with Diane Keaton to his relationship with Beverly D'Angelo to the young actress Lucilla Sola. Each woman brought a new story and a new headline. Meanwhile, Robert Duvall, who despised showiness, increasingly avoided every question about the old friend Pacino. In June 2023, Hollywood was shaken once again. TMZ and the Daily Mail simultaneously reported that Al Pacino, at 83, was expecting a child with his 29-year-old girlfriend, Noor Alfallah. Morning talk shows on ABC and E! News ran the story nonstop. A month later, at the backstage area of the AFI Lifetime Achievement Award ceremony in Los Angeles, a Vanity Fair journalist spotted Robert Duvall sitting quietly in one of the back rows, avoiding the cameras. A former assistant revealed that he simply shook his head and left the auditorium before Pacino walked onto the stage to receive his honor. The two men would never meet again. At the 2011 Academy Awards, during the event celebrating a reunion of The Godfather, the cameras captured Pacino and Duvall standing less than 3 meters apart, yet neither glanced at the other. The entire room applauded, while the two men who once called each other brothers stood like parallel shadows, never crossing even for a second. The media called it a silent war lasting half a century. No shouting, no public attacks, just a void neither man chose to fill. One chose fame, the other chose principle. Both became successful, but they would never again share the same frame. However, if the conflict with Pacino still carried a sense of quiet dignity, the next confrontation awaiting Duvall was entirely different. It did not unfold on a film set, but in a small room in London, where he would face a man the entire world hailed as a genius. 4. Francis Ford Coppola, the mentor who became a stranger. In the early 1970s, during Hollywood's most dazzling era, there were hardly any director-actor partnerships considered more in sync and more trusting than Francis Ford Coppola and Robert Duvall. The two first met in 1971 during a small audition at Paramount Studio in Los Angeles. Coppola, then only 32 years old, took one look at Duvall and immediately turned to producer Albert S. Ruddy, saying, "That is exactly the Tom Hagen I've been looking for." That single sentence lifted Duvall, then just an unknown stage actor from the shadows of New York, straight into the ranks of international stars. The Godfather 1972 not only transformed American cinema, but also bonded the two men with a unique connection, part mentor-student and part brotherhood. Coppola often invited Duvall to his home in San Francisco, where they would share dinner, listen to jazz, and discuss how to bring silence into performance. To Duvall, Coppola was a true mentor, someone who convinced him that cinema could surpass the limits of any individual. But glory always brings its own trials. In 1976, Coppola began filming Apocalypse Now in the Philippines, a production often described as hell captured through a 35mm lens. Duvall played Lieutenant Colonel Kilgore, a bizarre yet mesmerizing character whose line would become immortal. "I love the smell of napalm in the morning." The filming environment resembled a miniature war zone. Coppola rented real military helicopters from the Philippine Army, detonated actual bombs on Baylor Beach, and built an entire military camp right in the dense jungles of Luzon. Temperatures soared above 40 degrees Celsius, humidity hovered near 100%. A single shooting day could stretch to 18 hours amid deafening explosions and the suffocating smell of napalm smoke. According to the documentary Hearts of Darkness, a filmmaker's apocalypse written by Eleanor Coppola, there were days when Duvall collapsed on set from dehydration and exhaustion, yet Coppola still insisted on doing it again because the light wasn't real enough. A cinematographer told the Los Angeles Times Duvall threw up blood just a little and still got back on the horse to reshoot that same scene in the afternoon. No one dared object. When production was completed in 1979, Apocalypse Now became a cinematic legend. Coppola received the Palme d'Or at Cannes, and Duvall was praised as the soul of the film. Yet his name was pushed to the bottom of the Oscar nominations list. The New York Times wrote, "This is Coppola's film, but the heart belongs to Duvall," a compliment that was both grand and bittersweet. From that moment, their mentor-student relationship began to fracture. Duvall quietly kept his distance while Coppola dove headfirst into new projects. By 1989, Coppola invited Duvall to return for The Godfather Part III. Everyone assumed it would be a legendary reunion until the contract numbers surfaced. Paramount offered Duvall only $1 million, while Al Pacino received $5 million plus 5% of the box office profits. Duvall felt deeply undervalued. When he asked for renegotiation, the studio sent back a simple response through his agent: no additional increase. On September 5, 1989, Variety ran a headline: "Duvall refuses Godfather III, overpay dispute." The news spread rapidly across Hollywood. In a brief interview with the Los Angeles Times, Duvall said, "I won't act in a movie about family if that family does not respect each other." The quote became a headline throughout the industry, viewed as the final shot that ended one of American cinema's most iconic partnerships. Coppola tried repeatedly to mend the relationship. He wrote handwritten letters, made phone calls, even asked Mario Puzo, the author of The Godfather, to mediate. But Duvall did not respond. In October 1991, at a fundraising event in Napa Valley, the two unexpectedly crossed paths. Reporters from People magazine described the moment Duvall turned away without saying a word while Coppola stood frozen in the crowd. A year later, after Coppola fell into bankruptcy due to the financial disaster of Bram Stoker's Dracula losing more than $30 million, Esquire asked Duvall whether he felt sorry for his former mentor. He answered curtly, "Arrogance doesn't buy loyalty." From that point on, they never spoke again. In 2011, when Coppola received the Lifetime Achievement Award at the Oscars, as he walked onto the stage to thunderous applause, the seat reserved for Duvall in the middle row remained completely empty. E.T. Tonight broadcast the image with a caption, "Two legends now, two worlds no longer speaking the same language." Their relationship ended in silence. No apology, no handshake. Duvall lost the mentor he once considered the North Star of his craft. Coppola, in turn, lost the one actor who had ever looked him in the eye and dared to say enough. After that fracture, Duvall believed he had grown resistant to disappointment. But fate has its own cruel sense of humor, because only a few years later he would again be confronted by an old friend, the one he once shared a tiny New York apartment with, the one he ate canned noodles with, the one who dreamed alongside him of a life devoted to art. 5. John Wayne, The Fiery Confrontation in Colorado, 1969. In the summer of 1968, Paramount's True Grit Productions set up its entire base right in the middle of the small town of Ridgway, Colorado, a remote spot wedged between the snowy San Juan Mountains and the sun-cracked Uncompahgre Desert. Within just a few days, the entire town transformed into a massive movie set. Horse-drawn wagons rattled along the roads. Dust swirled through the air. Fake gunshots echoed from every corner, and the sunburned fields created a vivid western landscape that looked as if it had stepped straight out of legend. At the center of all this organized chaos stood veteran director Henry Hathaway, a man so notoriously strict that a single lift of his eyebrow could silence the entire crew. Beside him was John Wayne, the American icon just past 60, weighing nearly 100 kilos, walking with a limp, yet radiating an unmistakable aura of authority. Meanwhile, Robert Duvall, then 37, was only beginning to gain a bit of recognition after The Detective 1968. He had been cast as Lucky Ned Pepper, a cold-eyed outlaw of the American West. Duvall had always admired Wayne, even seeing him as a childhood hero. But only a few weeks into filming, the myth of the Western hero he had carried for so long began to crumble right before his eyes. According to True Grit Diaries by assistant director Hal Needham, on the morning of August 18, 1968, Hathaway ordered a reshoot of the gunfight between Wayne and Duvall in the Ure Valley. The temperature had climbed past 42 degrees Celsius, with dust covering the entire valley. Hathaway wanted Duvall to stand stiff, expressionless, and fire his gun with the eyes of a man who had already died. But Duvall pushed back, arguing that Ned Pepper was a beaten, haunted criminal who should appear shaken and terrified. The two debated for nearly 30 minutes amid the drone of set fans and the buzz of flies under the scorching sun. John Wayne, who always believed that the director's word was the law of God, grew impatient with the delays. A crew member told the Los Angeles Herald that Wayne marched forward, pointed directly at Duvall, and shouted so loudly that parts of it were picked up by the microphone. No one knows exactly what he said, but moments later, Duvall slammed his cowboy hat onto the ground while Wayne raised his hand as if he were about to charge at him. The entire crew froze. Hathaway was forced to yell, cut mid-scene, and suspend filming for 2 days to calm everyone down. Soon after, word leaked to the outside world. The December 1969 issue of Life magazine published a full 4-page photo feature titled "Robert Duvall, the Man Who Would Not Bow to America's Icon." The article quoted an anonymous reporter who claimed that Wayne had pressured Paramount, demanding that the studio keep Duvall out of any future Western projects. That rumor was later partly confirmed in the memoir of producer Hal Wallace, who revealed that Duvall had been frozen out of the studio system for 3 years. Even so, when True Grit premiered in early 1969, audiences poured into theaters. The film earned more than $30 million, a massive figure for that era. John Wayne received the first Best Actor Oscar of his career, while Duvall wasn't mentioned in any category. Ironically, the dusty battle scene, the very one that had sparked 2 days of heated debate, was praised by the New York Times as the most authentic moment in the entire film. The tension between Wayne and Duvall continued to simmer for years. At the 1970 Oscar after-party, Wayne practically ignored Duvall, even though they sat at the same table. A Variety journalist described the atmosphere that night as tight as a violin string, with Wayne enthusiastically recounting a hunting trip in Mexico, without glancing once at his former co-star. By 1971, a scandal erupted. Playboy published a shocking interview in which John Wayne declared his belief in the superiority of the white race and criticized anti-war movements. Hollywood was stunned. The wave of backlash spread instantly. Among the few artists brave enough to speak out publicly was Robert Duvall. In his interview with the Boston Globe, he said, "A true icon is someone who listens to the times, not someone who appoints himself the right to define them." The statement startled many. Conservative circles turned against Duvall, while younger artists began to see him as a symbol of a new generation, those willing to break free from outdated molds. On June 11, 1979, when John Wayne passed away, a state-level funeral was held in California and broadcast live on NBC and ABC. Hundreds of stars attended, from Clint Eastwood to James Stewart. Only Robert Duvall was absent. Cameras swept across the VIP row where a placard marked Mr. Duvall remained completely empty. His representative told the Los Angeles Times simply he didn't want to appear as a guest star in a script that had already been written. A week later, Variety ran the bold headline, "Robert Duvall, the only man who didn't bow at America's funeral." That line became the unofficial description of his image: cold, honest, and never performing a role he did not believe in. Decades later, when critics revisited the events, they concluded that the Colorado confrontation was far more than just a clash between two strong personalities. It marked a turning point in Hollywood, the shift from the era of perfect heroes like John Wayne to an age of rough, unpolished truth, with Robert Duvall representing a generation of artists who dared to challenge power in defense of their craft. That conflict taught Duvall the true price of being honest with himself. But he had no idea that only a few years later, the person who would anger him even more would not be a movie star, but the man standing behind the camera. 6. Dustin Hoffman. A longtime friendship turned into a professional rift. Before they became two towering figures of Hollywood, Robert Duvall and Dustin Hoffman were simply two broke young actors sharing a shabby attic room on East 58th Street in New York. In 1959, their place was barely more than 15 square meters, with damp, mold-streaked walls and wooden floors that creaked loudly with every step, and winters so bitterly cold that they had to burn candles just to keep themselves warm. They studied together at the neighborhood playhouse, drank cheap coffee at Horn and Hardart, and went to unpaid auditions just for the chance to say a few lines loudly in front of someone. Back then, Duvall and Hoffman treated one another almost like brothers. They stayed up late reading Tennessee Williams scripts, rehearsing lines beneath a desk lamp with only half a bulb still working, sharing every cigarette down to the last one. Both of them dreamed that someday their names would shine on the glowing marquees of Broadway. But Hollywood has always been a place where every dream comes with a price. In 1967, Dustin Hoffman suddenly became a nationwide sensation with The Graduate, directed by Mike Nichols. Overnight, he became the icon of an entire generation, the man who broke the American notion of what a handsome movie star was supposed to be. Time magazine put him on the cover with the line, "The anti-star who became a star." Meanwhile, Duvall was still struggling with small supporting roles on television and making ends meet by teaching acting at night. From that moment on, Hoffman changed dramatically. He lived completely as his characters, eating, sleeping, and thinking exactly the way his roles required, and approached the industry defined as absolute method acting. Duvall, who valued discipline above all, began to feel irritated. To him, acting was a craft of intellect, not a form of self-punishment. While Duvall maintained a clear boundary between himself and the roles he played, Hoffman gradually erased that line. That simmering conflict lasted for years before finally erupting in the late 1970s. In 1976, during the filming of Marathon Man, with the legendary Laurence Olivier Hoffman deprived himself of sleep for 3 nights straight, just to have an authentically exhausted face for a torture scene. Olivier, unimpressed, sarcastically remarked, "Try acting, dear boy. It's much easier." The story appeared on the front page of the New York Times on November 14, 1976, becoming a symbol of the extremism of the new generation of actors. 3 years later, in 1979, Kramer vs. Kramer won the Oscar, but it also marked the official end of Hoffman and Duvall's friendship. During a heated confrontation scene, Hoffman suddenly slapped Meryl Streep for real without warning. The blow was so hard that Streep burst into tears and ran off the set. Director Robert Benton had to halt filming for nearly an hour to calm everyone down. The Los Angeles Herald-Examiner ran a headline questioning method acting or violence disguised as art. To Hollywood, his behavior was praised as absolute dedication to the role. But to Duvall, it was nothing more than emotional exploitation. He confided to his close friend Bill Murray that he didn't recognize Dustin anymore. In the early 1980s, the two men still occasionally crossed paths at award ceremonies, but the way they looked at each other had utterly changed. By 1989, at an Oscar after-party at the Beverly Hilton Vanity Fair, captured the moment Duvall stood up and walked away from the table the instant Hoffman walked in without saying a single word. The magazine described the moment with the phrase, "the silence between two titans." A 20-year friendship ended without either of them needing to speak. Time moved on, and Hoffman remained an A-list star, but his reputation slowly dulled. By 2017, when Hollywood was shaken by a wave of scandals, his name appeared everywhere again. Several women stepped forward to recount stories from the past, prompting the media to dig feverishly into his history. The Hollywood Reporter, Variety, and The Guardian all published articles thousands of words long. Around the same time, Robert Duvall, now well into his 80s, was invited to a panel hosted by the American Film Institute, AFI, in Los Angeles. When the host asked about ethical boundaries in the art of acting, Duvall did not mention anyone by name. He simply replied softly, "Some people forget that actors borrow life to tell stories, but they do not have the right to possess it." The entire auditorium fell silent, then erupted into thunderous applause. The next day, Entertainment Weekly called it the harshest statement Hollywood has ever heard without needing to name names. From that moment forward, Duvall and Hoffman were never again seen together in the same frame. From two young men who once ate canned noodles under a freezing attic roof in New York, they became two opposing poles of the acting world, one choosing discipline, the other choosing extremity. Their friendship disappeared like cigarette smoke drifting across a Broadway stage long ago, leaving behind a bitter lesson for the entire Hollywood industry. Sometimes, when artists strive too hard to grasp the truth, they lose themselves before they even realize it. Yet, if Hoffman had once drained Duvall with his extremism, the next person he would face would ignite his anger through sheer arrogance. A legendary figure worshipped across America as the embodiment of masculine power. Yet in Duvall's eyes, he was merely a man living inside an illusion of authority. 7. Henry Hathaway, the man who taught Duvall what a dictatorial director truly was. In 1968, Hollywood was entering a period of dramatic transition. A new generation of filmmakers like Mike Nichols, Dennis Hopper, and Arthur Penn was rising with bold liberal ideas, while the veterans still clung tightly to the classical formula in which a tight script and a director ruling as the ultimate king defined the production. And right in the middle of these two colliding worlds, Paramount launched True Grit, a project that carried the distinct breath of an earlier era. The man in charge was Henry Hathaway, 70 years old, a director who had made more than 60 films, including Niagara with Marilyn Monroe and How the West Was Won. Within the industry, he was regarded as a filmmaker, both feared and respected. Production began in July 1968 in the San Juan Mountains of Colorado, a place where the air was thin and the weather swung wildly between freezing cold at dawn and scorching heat by noon. Paramount transformed the entire town of Ridgeway into the American West of the 1880s, building an entire replica village at a cost of more than 1.5 million USD, an enormous figure for the time. Over 200 crew members worked under Hathaway's command, a man who carried a walnut wood directing stick everywhere and tapped it hard on the ground each time he issued an order. At 37, Robert Duvall had just stepped out of the shadow of supporting roles, like the one in To Kill a Mockingbird, and was eager to prove himself. He was cast as Ned Pepper, a ruthless outlaw. Before the cameras rolled, Duvall studied real Western criminal records and even read Billy the Kid's journal to understand the mindset of men who lived beyond the law. But all that preparation hit a wall the moment he came face to face with the force named Henry Hathaway. Hathaway had absolutely no tolerance for actors creating freely. He believed that every emotion must be controlled by the director's lens. In the Paramount Diaries of 1970, a lighting technician wrote, "He yelled from morning to night, even threw his directing stick into the prop barrel whenever anyone made a mistake." Duvall, who despised being forced into anything, reacted immediately. Tension erupted on September 12, 1968, during the final showdown scene between Ned Pepper and Rooster Cogburn John Wayne. Hathaway wanted Duvall to stand perfectly still, never blink, and radiate the coldness of sharpened steel. Duvall pushed back, insisting that his character was a man moments away from death and should visibly show fear. The argument reached its peak when Hathaway slammed his director's chair to the ground, sending a piece of wood flying into an Aeroflex 35mm camera and cracking the lens. The entire shoot had to stop for nearly 3 hours. John Wayne stepped in to try to ease the tension, but Hathaway refused to give an inch. According to reporter James Bacon of the Los Angeles Herald, Duvall was practically ostracized from that day on. No one spoke to him during breaks, and his meals were separated from the rest. Hathaway even cut several of Duvall's lines in the final 2 scenes without warning. One crew member recalled hearing Hathaway state loudly in front of others, "I'm gonna teach that kid what it means to respect authority." After 4 grueling months, True Grit was finally completed. When the film premiered in June 1969, John Wayne won the Oscar for Best Actor, while Duvall was shut out of every nomination. Variety wrote an exceptional performance buried beneath much larger shadows. From that point, several Paramount directors began describing Duvall as difficult to work, with a coded way of placing him on an unofficial blacklist. Through the 1970s, as Hollywood shifted into a new era, the story of Duvall versus Hathaway continued to appear in film magazines as a prime example of the clash between 2 generations of directors. In a 1982 interview with Esquire director Peter Bogdanovich revealed Paramount once refused to sign Duvall for a project simply because Hathaway didn't want his name anywhere near it. In 1985, Henry Hathaway passed away in Los Angeles. Variety published an obituary with the line, "The last genius of classical Hollywood dies in solitude." At that moment, Duvall was filming The Apostle in Texas. When reporters asked if he would attend the funeral, he merely shook his head and replied, "No need to reopen old matters." Later, in a rare interview with The New Yorker when asked about True Grit, Duvall fell silent for a long time before softly saying, "That was the film that taught me how precious freedom is. No one has the right to command another person's emotions." From Henry Hathaway, he learned a bitter truth: a great director is not the one who issues orders, but the one who truly listens to their actors. Hathaway represented the old guard, rigid, closed-off authoritarian. Yet the next figure who entered Duvall's life came from the new generation, someone who seemed like an ally at first, but ultimately turned his greatest triumph into one of the most brutal hidden battles of his career. 8. Bruce Beresford. When winning an Oscar brought no peace. Texas spring of 1982. Under the scorching heat of the Waco Plains, the crew of Tender Mercies hastily set up a small wooden church by the highway. It was inside that modest structure that Robert Duvall, playing Max Sledge, a washed-up country singer, would sing on the wings of a dove in what would later be remembered as one of the most emotional moments in American cinema of that decade. No one on set could have imagined that only minutes after filming the scene, a quiet confrontation between Duvall and director Bruce Beresford would ignite one that would simmer and stretch all the way to the Oscars 2 years later. At the time, Beresford had just entered his early 40s, newly arrived in the United States after the resounding success of Breaker Morant in Australia. He was the kind of filmmaker obsessed with precision. Every camera movement had to land on the exact beat, and every shadow had to fall perfectly within the frame. In contrast, Robert Duvall, already one of Hollywood's most respected veterans, believed that cinema should be grounded in genuine emotion, in spontaneity, and even in the small imperfections that come from being human. From the very first day on set, these two entirely opposing philosophies clashed. According to the Dallas Morning News on April 15, 1982, the conflict began right in the opening scene. Beresford instructed Duvall to slow down to match the editing rhythm, and Duvall immediately pushed back, insisting that a drunk man would never speak slowly. A crew member later said that after that day, Duvall began filming certain scenes with a second unit team whenever the main director wasn't required an act, considered a major violation of etiquette in Hollywood. The tension reached its breaking point during the church sequence, the same scene that the New York Times would later call the soul of the film. Duvall wanted to shoot at 5 a.m., using the natural soft blue-gray dawn light of Texas. Beresford, however, insisted on waiting until evening because warm yellow light would look more beautiful for the film. Their argument dragged on until midnight without resolution. The next morning, before the director arrived, Duvall quietly called the second unit crew and shot the scene on his own. When Beresford discovered what happened, he erupted in anger and returned to his hotel in Austin, leaving more than 30 crew members waiting for half a day. Universal had to send a representative to mediate the situation. But ironically, the very rebellious scene Duvall filmed became a pivotal moment in the final cut. As Variety wrote in March 1984, it is the realest moment in the film, a slight tremble of humanity caught in the early morning light, something only Duvall could have created. Even after filming wrapped, the strain between the two men didn't fade. Duvall requested involvement in the editing process, fearing that his performance would be flattened, but Universal refused. The news leaked, prompting Esquire to run the headline, "Duvall shut out of the editing room for his own defining role." The studio quickly denied the report, but within Hollywood, it was clear that the relationship between the actor and the director had deteriorated to its lowest point. In March 1984, Tender Mercies made an unexpected mark on history. The modest $4.5 million film won 2 Academy Awards, including Best Actor for Robert Duvall. That night, inside the Dorothy Chandler Pavilion in Los Angeles, Duvall stepped on stage in a simple brown suit, bowed and thanked screenwriter Horton Foote and the Texas crew, but notably did not mention Bruce Beresford. The auditorium fell silent for a few seconds. The next morning, The Hollywood Reporter published a bold headline, "A cold slap at the Oscars, Duvall leaves out his director." The media quickly pounced. The Sydney Morning Herald even sent a reporter to the United States to interview Beresford. When asked about Duvall's omission, he simply said, "I respect him, but we will never be able to work together again." That brief response only fueled the rumors further. The Los Angeles Times published a 3-page analysis titled, "The Oscars Cannot Heal the Cracks Behind the Scenes." Meanwhile, Duvall chose silence. He turned down invitations to appear on post-Oscar talk shows and retreated to his Virginia ranch for months. Many believed he realized that the victory brought no peace at all, only exposed the bitter truth that in the film industry, a successful movie inevitably creates winners and losers, and the fractures are often unavoidable. Years later on, inside the actor's studio, when asked about Tender Mercies, Duvall said only one sentence: "Sometimes you have to choose loyalty to the character or to someone else. I chose the character." That remark closed a chapter in his career and began a new one where Duvall started writing, directing, and producing on his own, as he did with The Apostle in 1997, to prove that he no longer needed anyone else to control his emotions. And so, after more than half a century walking beneath the dazzling glow of Hollywood's spotlight, Robert Duvall has remained exactly who he has always been: unwaveringly honest, strong in spirit, unshakably firm, and utterly unwilling to bow to any kind of manufactured illusion. The conflicts and wounds he recalls are not merely behind-the-scenes anecdotes from a few films, but vivid reflections of the darker side of an industry long painted as flawless. Because behind every golden Oscar statue, behind every radiant smile on the red carpet, there are always silent battles fought between ambition, loyalty, and the real truth of a person's character. And what about you? In your opinion, among all the names mentioned, who do you believe left the deepest wound on Robert Duvall? Share your thoughts in the comments below so we can discuss it together. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel, turn on notifications, and share the video so you won't miss any of the startling stories hidden behind Hollywood's glittering facade.